The world is more complicated than just, there are law-abiding people and vigilantes. There are people who are put in impossible situations. And the reason that we have a justice system that we have, and that we have a jury of your peers, and that we have rules that draw distinctions between different kinds of homicide, is because cases are different.
Debbie's case is significant for many reasons. One of them is that it became way more than a law case, and it turned into a movement. Many, many people got involved. They were very outraged. There was a website that was created by you, freedebbie.org, the creation of this very movie, Crime After Crime, and the showing of it all over, garnering lots of grassroots support and awareness of the issue in general, and Debbie's case in particular. And then the DA reneging on the deal. And it was a very unorthodox strategy that the attorneys used to have media at the same time as they used the courts.
A convicted killer's fight for freedom has led to serious allegations against the LA County District Attorney's Office.
Most lawyers don't involve the media in their strategy at all. They want to deal only with the court system. They don't bring filmmakers into their own conversations with their own clients because they're concerned about the attorney-client privilege. But in this case, I think that was a very successful strategy. And the attorneys decided that if they were going to have bad faith from the district attorney, then they wanted to publicize that to the world, and the world responded.
Free Debbie now! Free Debbie now! Free Debbie now!
Who are you to keep her in there?
If you have an abuser who's then killed by his victim, and then the children are left essentially orphaned because she's jailed, that's a horrible outcome for everyone. And so you need to look very carefully. And so I think it's broadening our understanding of self-defense, broadening our understanding of involuntariness, so that we can not only, stop this problem, but also allow these families to move on and think about the broader consequences of just treating this type of violence the same as any other kind.
Hopefully there is a better understanding and will be ever better understood in the years ahead that this is not something caused by the victim. She does not bring it upon herself, that she is in fact the victim, and that there are significant ramifications to this physical abuse and emotional abuse.
In the 1980s, women who were abused, who were in an abusive relationship, women who were in abusive marriage, had nowhere to turn. They couldn't trust the police because if they called the police would not take them seriously, or if they did come to their homes, they would walk the abuser around the block and try to talk him down.
Most often women did not identify as a battered woman, and if they did not identify as a battered woman, then they most often would not seek shelter at a battered women's shelter.
The United States government has a responsibility through its police and its prosecutors and its judiciary to respond to this kind of problem, and we weren't doing a very good job in the late 70s and early 80s.
The movement in this country has been dramatic. 30 years ago, victims of domestic violence were ashamed that they were victims. They wouldn't even talk about it. And there was a general orientation, not just in the culture at large, but in the media. You can see movies where a husband slaps his wife, and it was considered appropriate.
Women in their local communities were isolated. They were afraid to tell their families. They were afraid to tell their friends. They were afraid to tell anyone about what had happened to them because it was so shameful. Whether they were raped or whether they were being abused by their husbands or by a boyfriend, it was not easy to come forward because there was no one to come forward to.
Norms matter, and family disputes, which is the way it was called before we started calling it domestic violence and family violence, was seen as it was just your bad luck. It was just your problem. It was a private problem that was supposed to be solved within the privacy of one's home.
And frankly, in so many of these communities, they couldn't prosecute because these were not crimes. Domestic abuse was not a crime.
There was a time when people didn't know about domestic violence because the victims of violence were underground, were ashamed and wouldn't talk about what had happened to them. There were times when people didn't know about torture in other countries for precisely the same reasons, because it was worn as a badge of shame. We didn't understand sexual orientation in this country because there were people who were underground and closeted and afraid to talk about it. And as we learn more about each other, and as we sort of humanize these parts of our lives which have been hidden in the shadows, once we illuminate them, it changes us. It makes us more understanding, more tolerant, and it forces us to adapt the law in that way.
I think what we did with groups across this country is we really took what was once very private and made it very public, and said there's no excuse for domestic violence, created laws that actually held people accountable in the criminal court for acts of domestic violence. And what was once considered not a very big deal is now considered a very serious problem in the United States.
The Violence Against Women Act was a watershed piece of legislation, just as the Civil Rights Amendments of 1964 were. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a watershed in civil rights. This is a watershed for domestic violence prevention.
For the first time, we started making these acts of violence crimes against women.
This shouldn't be a woman's issue. This is everyone's issue. We need to train our daughters to be strong and assertive and not be ashamed if they find themselves in an abusive relationship, but to take the measures to protect themselves and to stop the abuse. And we've got to treat our sons to train our sons to treat girls and women with respect, and to never engage in domestic violence.